use of persuasive technologies on Internet platforms. Each of our witnesses today has a great deal of expertise with respect to the use of artificial intelligence and algorithms more broadly, as well as in the more narrow context of engagement and persuasion, and brings unique perspectives to these matters. Your participation in this important hearing is appreciated, particularly as this committee continues to work on drafting data privacy legislation. I convened this hearing in part to inform legislation that I'm developing that would require Internet platforms to give consumers the option to engage with the platform without having the experience shaped by algorithms driven by user-specific data. Internet platforms have transformed the way we communicate and interact, and they have made incredibly positive impacts on society in ways that are too numerous to count. The vast majority of content on these platforms is innocuous, and at its best, it is entertaining, educational, and beneficial to the public. However, the powerful mechanisms behind these platforms meant to enhance engagement also have the ability, or at least the potential, to influence the thoughts and behaviors of literally billions of people. That is one reason why there is widespread unease about the power of these platforms and why it is important for the public to better understand how these platforms use artificial intelligence and opaque algorithms to make inferences from the reams of data about us that affect behavior and influence outcomes. Without safeguards, such as real transparency, there is a risk that some Internet platforms will seek to optimize engagement to benefit their own interests and not necessarily to benefit the consumer's interests. In 2013, former Google executive chairman Eric Schmidt wrote that modern technology platforms, and I quote, are even more powerful than most people realize, and our future will be profoundly altered by their adoption and successfulness in societies everywhere, end quote. Since that time, algorithms and artificial intelligence have rapidly become an important part of our lives, largely without us even realizing it. As online content continues to grow, large technology companies rely increasingly on AI-powered automation to select and display content that will optimize engagement. Unfortunately, the use of artificial intelligence and algorithms to optimize engagement can have an unintended and possibly even dangerous downside. In April, Bloomberg reported that YouTube has spent years chasing engagement while ignoring internal calls to address toxic videos, such as vaccination conspiracies and disturbing content aimed at children. Earlier this month, New York Times reported that YouTube's automated recommendation system was found to be automatically playing a video of children playing in their backyard pool to other users who had watched sexually themed content. That is truly troubling, and it indicates the real risks in a system that relies on algorithms and artificial intelligence to optimize for engagement. And these are not isolated examples. For instance, some have suggested that the so-called filter bubble created by social media platforms like Facebook may contribute to our political polarization by encapsulating users within their own comfort zones or echo chambers. Congress has a role to play in ensuring companies have the freedom to innovate, but in a way that keeps consumers' interests and well-being at the forefront of their progress. While there must be a healthy dose of personal responsibility when users participate in seemingly free online services, companies should also provide greater transparency about how exactly the content we see is being filtered. Consumers should have the option to engage with a platform without being manipulated by algorithms powered by their own personal data, especially if those algorithms are opaque to the average user. We are convening this hearing in part to examine whether algorithmic explanation and transparency are policy options that Congress should be considering. Ultimately, my hope is that at this hearing today, we are able to better understand how Internet platforms use algorithms, artificial intelligence, and machine learning to influence outcomes. And we have a very distinguished panel before us. Today, we are joined by Tristan Harris, the co-founder of the Center for Humane Technology, Ms. Maggie Stanfield, the Director of Google's User Experience, Dr. Stephen Wolfram, founder of Wolfram Research, and Mrs. Rashida Richardson, the Director of Policy Research at the AI Now Institute. Thank you all again for participating on this important topic, and I want to recognize Senator Schatz for any opening remarks that he may have.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Social media and other Internet platforms make their money by keeping users engaged, and so they've hired the greatest engineering and tech minds to get users to stay longer inside of their apps and on their websites. They've discovered that one way to keep us all hooked is to use algorithms that feed us a constant stream of increasingly more extreme and inflammatory content. And this content is pushed out with very little transparency or oversight by humans. This setup and also basic human psychology makes us vulnerable to lies, hoaxes, and misinformation. The Wall Street Journal investigation last year found that YouTube's recommendation engine often leads users to conspiracy theories, partisan viewpoints, and misleading videos, even when users aren't seeking out that kind of content. And we saw that YouTube's algorithms were recommending videos of children after users watched sexualized content that did not involve children. And this isn't just a YouTube problem. We saw all of the biggest platforms struggle to contain the spread of videos of the Christchurch massacre and its anti-Muslim propaganda. The shooting was live-streamed on Facebook, and over 1 million copies were uploaded across platforms. Many people reported seeing it on autoplay on their social media feeds and not realizing what it was. And just last month, we saw a fake video of the Speaker of the House go viral. I want to thank the Chairman for holding this hearing because, as these examples illustrate, something is really wrong here. And I think it's this. Silicon Valley has a premise. It's that society would be better, more efficient, smarter, more frictionless if we would just eliminate steps that include human judgment. But if YouTube, Facebook, or Twitter employees, rather than computers, were making the recommendations, would they have recommended these awful videos in the first place? Now, I'm not saying that employees need to make every little decision, but companies are letting algorithms run wild and only using humans to clean up the mess. Algorithms are amoral. Companies design them to optimize for engagement as their highest priority, and by doing so, they eliminated human judgment as part of their business models. As algorithms take on an increasingly important role, we need for them to be more transparent, and companies need to be more accountable for the outcomes that they produce. Imagine a world where pharmaceutical companies were not responsible for the long-term impacts of their medicine and we couldn't test their efficacy. Or if engineers were not responsible for the safety and structure they design and we couldn't review the blueprints. We are missing that kind of accountability for Internet platform companies. Right now, all we have are representative sample sets, data scraping, and anecdotal evidence. These are useful tools, but they are inadequate for the rigorous systemic studies that we need about the societal effects of algorithms. These are conversations worth having because of the significant influence that algorithms have on people's daily lives. And this is a policy issue that will only grow more important as technology continues to advance. And so thank you, Mr. Chairman, for holding this hearing, and I look forward to hearing from our experts.
Thank you, Senator Schatz. And we do, as I said, have a great panel to hear from today. And we're going to start on my left and your right with Mr. Tristan Harris, who's co-founder and executive director of Center for Humane Technology. Ms. Maggie Stanfield, as I mentioned, who is the Google User Experience Director at Google Inc., Dr. Stephen Wolfram, who is the founder and chief executive officer of Wolfram Research, and Ms. Rashida Richardson, Director of Policy Research at AI Now Institute. So if you would, confine your oral remarks to as close as 5 minutes as possible. It'll give us an opportunity to maximize the chance for members to ask questions. But thank you all for being here. We look forward to hearing from you. Mr. Harris.
Thank you, Senator Thune and Senator Schatz. Everything you said, it's sad to me because it's happening not by accident but by design. Because the business model is to keep people engaged, which in other words, this hearing is about persuasive technology. And persuasion is about an invisible asymmetry of power. When I was a kid, I was a magician. And magic teaches you that you can have asymmetric power without the other person realizing it. You can masquerade to have asymmetric power while looking like you have an equal relationship. You say, pick a card, any card, while meanwhile you know exactly how to get that person to pick the card that you want. And essentially what we're experiencing with technology is an increasing asymmetry of power that's been masquerading itself as an equal or contractual relationship where the responsibility is on us. So let's walk through why that's happening. In the race for attention, because there's only so much attention, companies have to get more of it by being more and more aggressive. I call it the race to the bottom of the brainstem. So it starts with techniques like pull to refresh. So you pull to refresh your newsfeed. That operates like a slot machine. It has the same kind of addictive qualities that keep people in Las Vegas hooked to the slot machine. Other examples are removing stopping cues. So if I take the bottom out of this glass and I keep refilling the water or the wine, you won't know when to stop drinking. So that's what happens with infinitely scrolling feeds. We naturally remove the stopping cues, and this is what keeps people scrolling. But the race for attention has to get more and more aggressive, and so it's not enough just to get your behavior and predict what will take your behavior. We have to predict how to keep you hooked in a different way. And so it crawled deeper down the brainstem into our social validation. So that was the introduction of likes and followers. How many followers do I have? And that got it was much cheaper to, instead of getting your attention, to get you addicted to getting attention from other people. And this has created the kind of mass narcissism and mass cultural thing that's happening with young people, especially today. And after 2 decades in decline, the mental health of 10 to 14-year-old girls has actually shot up 170% in the last 8 years. And this has been very characteristically the cause of social media. And in the race for attention, it's not enough just to get people addicted to attention. The race has to migrate to AI. Who can build a better predictive model of your behavior? And so if you give an example of YouTube. So there you are, you're about to hit play on a YouTube video, and you hit play, and then you think you're going to watch this one video, and then you wake up 2 hours later and say, oh my God, what just happened? And the answer is because you had a supercomputer pointed at your brain. And at the moment you hit play, it wakes up an avatar voodoo doll-like version of you inside of a Google server. And that avatar, based on all the clicks and likes and everything you've ever made, those are like your hair clippings and toenail clippings and nail filings that make the avatar look and act more and more like you. So that inside of a Google server, they can simulate more and more possibilities. If I prick you with this video, if I prick you with this video, how long would you stay? And the business model is simply what maximizes watch time. This leads to the kind of algorithmic extremism that you've pointed out. And this is what's caused 70% of YouTube's traffic now to be driven by recommendations, not by human choice, but by the machines. And it's a race between Facebook's voodoo doll, where you flick your finger, can they predict what to show you next, and Google's voodoo doll. And these are abstract metaphors that apply to the whole tech industry, where it's a race between who can better predict your behavior. Facebook has something called loyalty prediction, where they can actually predict to an advertiser when you're about to become disloyal to a brand. So if you're a mother and you take Pampers diapers, they can tell Pampers, hey, this user is about to become disloyal to this brand. So in other words, they can predict things about us that we don't know about our own selves. And that's a new level of asymmetric power. And we have a name for this asymmetric relationship, which is a fiduciary relationship or a duty of care relationship. The same standard we apply to doctors, to priests, to lawyers. Imagine a world in which priests only make their money by selling access to the confession booth to someone else. Except in this case, Facebook listens to 2 billion people's confessions, has a supercomputer next to them, and is calculating and predicting confessions you're going to make before you know you're going to make them. And that's what's causing all this havoc. So I'd love to talk about more of these things later. I just want to finish up by saying this affects everyone, even if you don't use these products. You still send your kids to a school where other people believing that anti-vaccine conspiracy theories causes impact for your life, or other people voting in your elections. And when Marc Andreessen said in 2011, the quote was, software is going to eat the world. And what he meant by that, Marc Andreessen was the founder of Netscape. What he meant by that was that software can do every part of society more efficiently than non-software, right? Because it's just adding efficiencies. And so we're going to allow software to eat up our elections. We're going to allow it to eat up our media, our taxi, our transportation. And the problem was that software was eating the world without taking responsibility for it. We used to have rules and standards around Saturday morning cartoons. And when YouTube gobbles up that part of society, it just takes away all of those protections. And I just want to finish up by saying that I know Mr. Rogers, Fred Rogers, testified before this committee 50 years ago, concerned about the animated bombardment that we were showing children. I think he would be horrified today about what we're doing now. And at that same time, he was able to talk to the committee, and that committee made a choice differently. So I'm hoping we can talk more about that today. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Harris. Ms. Stanfield.
Chairman Thune, Ranking Member Schatz, members of the committee, thank you for inviting me to testify today on Google's efforts to improve the digital well-being of our users. I appreciate the opportunity to outline our programs and discuss our research in this space. My name is Maggie Stanfield. I'm a User Experience Director, and I lead the Cross-Google Digital Wellbeing Initiative. Google Digital Wellbeing Initiative is an initiative that's a top company goal, and we focus on providing users with insights about their individual tech habits and the tools to support an intentional relationship with technology. At Google, we've heard from many of our users all over the world that technology is a key contributor to their sense of well-being. It connects them to those they care about. It provides information and resources that build their sense of safety and security. And this access has democratized information and provided services for billions of users around the world. For most people, their interaction with technology is positive, and they are able to make healthy choices about screen time and overall use. But as technology becomes increasingly prevalent in our day-to-day lives, for some people, it can distract from the things that matter most. We believe technology should play a useful role in people's lives, and we've committed to helping people strike a balance that feels right for them. This is why our CEO, Sundar Pichai, first announced the Digital Wellbeing Initiative with several new features across Android, Family Link, YouTube, Gmail, all of these to help people better understand their tech usage and focus on what matters most. In 2019, we applied what we learned from users and experts and introduced a number of new features to support our Digital Wellbeing Initiative. I'd like to go into more depth about our products and tools we've developed for our users. On Android, the latest version of our mobile operating system, we added key capabilities to help users take a better balance with technology and make sure that they can focus on raising awareness of tech usage and providing controls to help them oversee their tech use. This includes a dashboard. It shows information about their time on devices. It includes app timers, so people can set time limits on specific apps. It requires a do not disturb function to silence phone calls and texts, as well as those visual interruptions that pop up. And we've introduced a new wind down feature that automatically puts the user's display into night light mode, and that reduces blue light and grayscale to remove color and ultimately the temptation to scroll. Finally, we've got a new setting called focus mode. This allows pausing specific apps and notifications that users might find distracting. On YouTube, we have similarly launched a series of updates to help our users define their own sense of well-being. This includes time-watched profiles, take-a-break reminders, the ability to disable audible notifications, and the option to combine all YouTube app notifications into one notification. We've also listened to the feedback about the YouTube recommendation system. Over the past year, we've made a number of improvements to these recommendations, raising up content from authoritative sources when people are coming to YouTube for news, as well as reducing recommendations of content that comes close to violating our policies or spreads harmful misinformation. When it comes to children, we believe the bar is even higher. That's why we've created Family Link to help parents stay in the loop as their child explores on Android. And on Android Q, parents will be able to supervise, set screen time limits and bedtimes, and remotely lock their child's device. Similarly, YouTube Kids was designed with the goal of ensuring that parents have control over the content their children watch. In order to keep the videos in the YouTube Kids app family-friendly, we use a mix of filters, user feedback, and moderators. We also offer parents the option to take full control over what their children watch by hand-selecting the content that appears in their app. We're also actively conducting our own research and engaging in important expert partnerships with independent researchers to build a better understanding of the many personal impacts of digital technology. We believe this knowledge can help shape new solutions and ultimately drive the entire industry toward creating products that support a better sense of well-being. To make sure we are evolving this strategy, we have launched a longitudinal study to better understand the effectiveness of our digital well-being tools. We believe this is just the beginning. As technology becomes more integrated into people's daily lives, we have a responsibility to ensure that our products support their digital well-being. We are committed to investing more, optimizing our products, and focusing on quality experiences. Thank you for the opportunity to outline our efforts in this space. I'm happy to answer any questions you might have.
Thank you, Ms. Stanfield. Mr. Wolfram.
Well, thanks for inviting me here today. I have to say that this is pretty far from my usual kind of venue, but I have spent my life working on the science and technology of computation and AI, and perhaps some of what I know can be helpful here today. So, first of all, here's a way I think one can kind of frame the issue. So many of the most successful internet companies like Google and Facebook and Twitter are what one can call automated content selection businesses. They ingest lots of content, and then they essentially use AI to select what to actually show to their users. How does that AI work? How can one tell if it's doing the right thing? People often assume that computers just run algorithms that someone sat down and wrote, but modern AI systems don't work that way. Instead, lots of the programs they use are actually constructed automatically, usually by learning from some massive number of examples. And if you go look inside those programs, there's usually embarrassingly little that we humans can understand in there. And here's the real problem. It's sort of a fact of basic science that if you insist on explainability, then you can't get the full power of a computational system or an AI. So if you can't open up the AI and understand what it's doing, how about sort of putting external constraints on it? Can you, like, write a contract that says what the AI is allowed to do? Well, partly actually through my own work, we're starting to be able to formulate computational contracts, contracts that are written not in legalese, but in a precise, executable, computational language suitable for an AI to follow. But what should the contract say? I mean, what's the right answer for what should be at the top of someone's newsfeed? Or what exactly should be the algorithmic rule for balance or diversity of content? Well, as AIs start to run more and more of our world, we're going to have to develop a whole network of kind of AI laws. And it's going to be super important to get this right, probably starting off by agreeing on sort of the right AI constitution. But it's going to be a hard thing, kind of making computational how people want the world to work. Right now, that's still in the future. But, okay, so what can we do about people's concerns now about automatic content selection? I have to say that I don't see a purely technical solution. But I didn't want to come here and say that everything is impossible, especially since I personally like to spend my life solving, quotes, impossible problems. In fact, I think that if we want to do it, we actually can use technology to set up kind of a market-based solution. I've got a couple of concrete suggestions about how to do that. Both are based on giving users a choice about who to trust for the final content they see. One of the suggestions introduces what I call final ranking providers. The other introduces constraint providers. In both cases, these are third-party providers who basically insert their own little AIs into the pipeline of delivering content to users. And the point is that users can choose which of these providers they want to trust. The idea is to leverage everything that the big automated content selection businesses have, but to essentially add a new market layer. So users get to know that they're picking a particular way that content is selected for them. It also means that you get to avoid kind of all or nothing banning of content, and you don't have kind of a single point of failure for spreading bad content. And you open up a new market, potentially delivering even higher value for users. Of course, for better or worse, unless you decide to force certain content or diversity of content, which you could, people can live kind of in their own content bubbles, though importantly, they get to choose those themselves. Well, lots of technical details about everything I'm saying, as well as some deep science about what's possible and what's not. And I tried to explain a little bit more about that in my written testimony, and I'm happy to try and answer whatever questions I can here. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Wolfram. Ms. Richardson.
Chairman Thune, Ranking Member Schatz, and members of the subcommittee, thank you for inviting me to speak today. My name is Rashida Richardson, and I'm the Director of Policy Research at the AI Now Institute at New York University, which is the first university research institute dedicated to understanding the social implications of artificial intelligence. Part of my role includes researching the increasing reliance on AI and algorithmic systems and crafting policy and legal recommendations to address and mitigate the problems we identify in our research. The use of data-driven technologies like recommendation algorithms, predictive analytics, and inferential systems are rapidly expanding in both consumer and government sectors. They determine where our children go to school, whether someone will receive Medicaid benefits, who is sent to jail before trial, which news articles we see, and which job seekers are offered an interview. Thus, they have a profound impact on our lives and require immediate attention and action by Congress. Though these technologies affect every American, they are primarily developed and deployed by a few powerful companies and therefore shaped by these companies' incentives, values, and interests. These companies have demonstrated limited insight into whether their products will harm consumers and even less experience in mitigating those harms. So while most technology companies promise that their products will lead to broad societal benefits, there's little evidence to support these claims, and in fact, mounting evidence points to the contrary. For example, IBM's Watson supercomputer was designed to improve patient outcomes, but recently internal IBM documents showed it actually provided unsafe and erroneous cancer treatment recommendations. This is just one of numerous examples that have come to light in the last year showing the difference between the marketing companies used to sell these technologies and the stark reality of how these technologies ultimately perform. While many powerful industries pose potential harms to consumers with new products, the industry producing algorithmic and AI systems pose 3 particular risks that current laws and incentive structures fail to adequately address. The first risk is that AI systems are based on compiled data that reflect historical and existing social and economic conditions. This data is neither neutral or objective. Thus, AI systems tend to reflect and amplify cultural biases, value judgments, and social inequities. Meanwhile, most existing laws and regulations struggle to account for or adequately remedy these disparate outcomes, as they tend to focus on individual acts of discrimination and less on systemic bias or bias encoded in the development process. The second risk is that many AI systems and internet platforms are optimization systems that prioritize technology companies' monetary interests and results in products being designed to keep users engaged while often ignoring social costs, like how the product may affect non-users, environments, and markets. A non-AI example of this logic and model is a slot machine, while a recent AI-based example is the navigation system Waze, which was subject to public scrutiny following many incidents across the U.S. where the application redirected highway traffic through residential neighborhoods unequipped for the influx of vehicles, which increased accidents and risk to pedestrians. The third risk is that most of these technologies are black boxes, both technologically and legally. Technologically, they're black boxes because most of the internal workings are hidden away inside the companies. Legally, technology companies obstruct accountability efforts through claims of proprietary or trade secret legal protections, even though there is no evidence that legitimate inspection, auditing, or oversight poses any competitive risk. Controversies regarding emerging technologies are becoming increasingly common and show the harm caused by technologies optimized for narrow goals like engagement, speed, and profit at the expense of social and ethical considerations like safety and accuracy. We are at a critical moment where Congress is in a position to act on some of the most pressing issues, and by doing so, paving the way for a technological future that is safe, accountable, and equitable. With these concerns in mind, I offer the following recommendations, which are detailed in my written statement. Require technology companies to waive trade secrecy and other legal claims that hinder oversight and accountability mechanisms. Require public disclosure of technologies that are involved in any decision about consumers by name and vendor. Empower consumer protection agencies to apply truth in advertising laws. Revive the Congressional Office of Technology Assessment to perform pre-market review and post-market monitoring of technologies. Enhance whistleblower protections for technology company employees that identify unethical and unlawful uses of AI or algorithms. Require any transparency or accountability mechanisms to include a detailed reporting of the full stack supply chain, and require companies to perform and publish algorithmic impact assessments prior to public use of products and services. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Richardson. Well, let me start, Mr. Harris, with you. As we go about crafting consumer data privacy legislation in this committee, we know that internet platforms like Google and Facebook have vast quantities of data about each user. What can these companies predict about users based on that data?
Thank you for the question. So I think there's an important connection to make between privacy and persuasion that I think often isn't linked, so maybe it's helpful to link that. With Cambridge Analytica, that was an event in which, based on your Facebook likes, based on 150 of your Facebook likes, I could predict your political personality, and then I could do things with that. The reason I described in my opening statement that this is about an increasing asymmetry of power is that without any of your data, I can predict increasing features about you using AI. There's a paper recently that with 80% accuracy, I can predict your same big 5 personality traits that Cambridge Analytica got from you without any of your data. All I have to do is look at your mouse movements and click patterns. So in other words, it's the end of the poker face. Your behavior is your signature, and we can know your political personality. Based on tweet text alone, we can actually know your political affiliation with about 80% accuracy. Computers can calculate probably that you're homosexual before you might know that you're homosexual. They can predict with 95% accuracy that you're going to quit your job, according to an IBM study. They can predict that you're pregnant. They can predict your microexpressions on your face better than a human being can. Microexpressions are your soft reactions to things that are not very visible but are invisibly visible. Computers can predict that. As you keep going and you realize that you can start to deep fake things, you can actually generate a new synthetic piece of media, a new synthetic face or synthetic message that is perfectly tuned to these characteristics. And the reason why I open the statement by saying we have to recognize that what this is all about is a growing asymmetry of power between technology and the limits of the human mind. My favorite sociobiologist, E.O. Wilson, said the fundamental problem of humanity is that we have Paleolithic ancient emotions, we have medieval institutions, and we have godlike technology. So we're chimpanzees with nukes, and our Paleolithic brains are limited against the increasing exponential power of technology at predicting things about us. The reason why it's so important to migrate this relationship from being extractive to get things out of you to being a fiduciary is you can't have asymmetric power that is specifically designed to extract things from you. Just like you can't have, again, lawyers or doctors whose entire business model is to take everything they learn and sell it to someone else. Except in this case, the level of things that we can predict about you is far greater than actually each of those fields combined when you actually add up all the data that assembles a more and more accurate voodoo doll of each of us. And there's 2 billion voodoo dolls, by the way. There's one out of every 4 people on Earth with YouTube's and Facebook are more than 2 billion people.
Ms. Stanfield, in your prepared testimony, you note that companies like Google have a responsibility to ensure that products support users' digital well-being. Does Google use persuasive technology, meaning technology that is designed to change people's attitudes and behaviors? And if so, how do you use it? And do you believe that persuasive technology supports a user's digital well-being?
Thank you, Senator. No, we do not use persuasive technology at Google. In fact, our foremost principles are built around transparency, security, and control of our users' data. Those are the principles through which we design products at Google.
Dr. Wolfram, in your prepared testimony, you write that it's impossible, I should say, to expect any useful form of general explainability for automated content selection systems. If this is the case, what should policymakers require or expect of Internet platforms with respect to algorithm explanation or transparency?
I don't think that explaining how algorithms work is a great direction. I mean, the basic issue is if the algorithm is doing something really interesting, then you're not going to be able to explain it, because if you could explain it, it would be like saying you can jump ahead and say what it's going to do without letting it just do what it's going to do. So it's kind of a scientific issue that if you're going to have something that is explainable, then it isn't getting to use the sort of full power of computation to do what it does. So my own view, which is sort of disappointing for me as a technologist, is that you actually have to put humans in the loop. And in a sense, the thing to understand about AI is we can automate many things about how things get done. What we don't get to automate is the goals of what we want to do. The goals of what we want to do are not something that is sort of definable as an automatic thing. The goals of what we want to do is something that humans have to come up with. And so I think the most promising direction is to think about breaking kind of the AI pipeline and figuring out where you can put into that AI pipeline the right level of kind of human input. My own feeling is the most promising possibility is to kind of insert, to leave the great value that's been produced by the current automated content selection companies in ingesting large amounts of data, being able to monetize large amounts of content, et cetera, but to insert a way for users to be able to choose who they trust about what finally shows up in their news feed or in their search results or whatever else. And I think that there are technological ways to make that kind of insertion that will actually, if anything, add to the richness of potential experience for users and possibly even the financial returns for the market.
And very quickly, Ms. Richardson, what are your views about whether algorithm explanation or algorithm transparency are appropriate policy responses, and kind of response to Dr. Wolfram's?
I think they're a good interim step in that transparency is almost necessary to understand what these technologies are doing and to assess the benefits and risk. But I don't think transparency or even explainability is an end goal, because I still think you're going to need some level of legal regulation to impose liability so bad or negligent actors act in a proper manner, but also to incentivize companies to do the right thing or apply due diligence, because in a lot of cases that I cited in my written testimony, there are sort of public relations disasters that happened on the back end, and many of them could have been assessed or interpreted during the development process, but companies aren't incentivized to do that. So in some ways, transparency and explainability can give both legislators and the public more insight into these choices that companies are making to assess whether or not liability should be attached or different regulatory enforcement needs to be pursued.
Thank you. Senator Schatz.
Thank you, Chairman. Thank you to the testifiers. First, a yes or no question. Do we need more human supervision of algorithms on online platforms? Mr. Harris.
Yes.
Yes.
Yes, although I would put some footnotes.
Sure.
Yes, with footnotes.
So I want to follow up on what Dr. Wolfram said in terms of the unbreakability of these algorithms and the lack of transparency that is sort of built into what they are foundationally. And the reason I think that's an important point that you're making, which is that you need a human circuit breaker at some point to say, no, I choose not to be fed things by an algorithm. I choose to jump off of this platform. That's one aspect of humans acting as a circuit breaker. I'm a little more interested in the human employee, either at the line level or the human employee at the supervisory level, who takes some responsibility for how these algorithms evolve over time. And Ms. Richardson, I want you to maybe speak to that question, because it seems to me as policymakers, that's where the sweet spot is to find an incentive or a requirement where these companies will not allow these algorithms to run essentially unsupervised and not even understood by the highest echelons of the company except in their output. And so, Ms. Richardson, can you help me to flesh out what that would look like in terms of enabling human supervision?
So I think it's important to understand some of the points about the power asymmetry that Mr. Harris mentioned, because I definitely do think we need a human in the loop, but we also need to be cognizant of who actually has power in those dynamics, and that you don't necessarily want a frontline employee taking full liability for a decision that or for a system that they had no input in the design or even in their current sort of position in using it. So I think it needs to go all the way up in that if you're thinking about liability or responsibility in any form, it needs to attach at those who are actually making decisions about the goals, the designs, and ultimately the implementation and use of these technologies, and then figuring out what are the right pressure points or incentive dynamics to encourage companies or those making those decisions to make the right choice that benefits society.
Yeah, I think that's right. I think that none of this ends up coming to much unless the executive level of these companies feel a legal and financial responsibility to supervise these algorithms. Ms. Stanfill, I was a little confused by one thing you said. Did you say Google doesn't use persuasive technology?
That is correct, sir.
Mr. Harris, is that true?
It's complicated. Persuasion is happening all throughout the ecosystem. In my mind, by the way, this is less about accusing one company, Google or Facebook. It's about understanding that every company...
Yeah, I get that, but she's here, and,
yes.
and she just said that they don't use persuasive technology. And I'm trying to figure out, are you talking about just the Google suite of products? You're not talking about YouTube? Or are you saying in the whole alphabet pantheon of companies, you don't use persuasive technology? Because either I misunderstand your company or I misunderstand the definition of persuasive technology. Can you help me to understand what's going on here?
Sure. With respect to my response, Mr. Senator, it is related to the fact that dark patterns and persuasive technology is not core to how we design our products at Google, which are built around transparency.
Are you talking about YouTube or the whole family of companies?
The whole family of companies, including YouTube.
You don't want to clarify that a little further?
We build our products with privacy, security, and control for the users. That is what we build for. And ultimately, this builds a lifelong relationship with the user, which is primary. That's our trust.
I don't know what any of that meant.